Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Cruikshank, and I'm with Eaton Smith, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's webinar with Howard Eaton and Sandra Husel. We're just a couple of minutes before 5 o'clock here. I'll let some people enter in and turn on their video as they are comfortable. It's always nice to see a crowd of friendly faces, but we understand if you don't want to turn on your video for whatever reason. We would ask during the presentation that you keep your mics muted just so there's no background noise, and there might be an opportunity for some questions later, certainly through the chat room. We've got Chris monitoring the chat room, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. And if you have a question of a more private matter or something you'd like to talk to somebody more personally about, Sandra and I are both available to speak with you personally about that. You can just, you can get in touch with us a number of different ways, and we'll share that with you in the chat box as well. We'll make it real simple for you. One of the fun things about Zoom for me is that we get people internationally, and it's really fun to connect with you all in ways that we would not have been able to before. So welcome from whatever corner of the world that you're coming from today. Great. I'm going to take a second just to introduce the two speakers tonight. We've got some questions for them. We have picked sort of the top 7 or 8 questions that we get in admissions and that people are wondering about Aerosmith and Aerosmith Online and what we do and how we can help. First person is Howard Eaton, who's the founder of the Eaton Aerosmith program and schools and companies. And I'll let him do his own introduction. I met Howard in 2006 as he was opening our first school in Vancouver, the Eaton Aerosmith School up at UBC. And Sandra Husel was already working with him as his first teacher. And they go back even further than that. And it's been a real pleasure to work with the two of them and the team as we help those with learning difficulties rewire their brains. So Howard, first to you, and then Sandra to you, and then we've got some questions that I know everyone wants to hear.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you guys here, learn about Eaton Aerosmith and what we're doing for children and adults with learning difficulties. I'm excited to have some time with you this evening, and I look forward to the discussion and answer any questions. Welcome.
Howard, first, right off the top, I know everyone wants to know, why did you start Eaton Aerosmith Schools?
I know that when I was in grade 7 or age 7 or 8, the last thing my parents would have thought was that Howie would be starting schools, mostly because I couldn't read. In fact, I didn't learn to read till I was 12 years old. I was diagnosed with severe developmental dyslexia. And even throughout university, I never imagined that I would get into education. I wanted to stay as far away from schools as possible due to all the frustration and dislike I had for education itself. But life didn't turn out that way. Here I am involved in education and helping other individuals with learning disabilities. So my story goes back to 1972 when I was diagnosed with dyslexia in Vancouver, Canada, by a psychiatrist who was an expert on dyslexia. In fact, his other area of expertise was Orton Gillingham, and him and his wife brought Orton Gillingham a method for helping children and adults with dyslexia learn to read to Vancouver, BC in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And that was my beginning of my journey into this field of learning disabilities. In fact, back in Vancouver, British Columbia in the 70s, there wasn't much help for boys like me diagnosed with dyslexia. In fact, mostly boys were diagnosed with dyslexia, not girls. I think we mostly had the behavioral issues attached and we sort of got identified. But I was sent away to school, to a private school in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, Pennsylvania, called the Kildonan School, to start my remediation in learning how to read. And I received intensive Orton Gillingham for years, and eventually got back into the public school and struggled. I could read, and my spelling was better, but I had trouble with remembering what I was listening to. I had trouble with written output because of dysgraphia. I had trouble with comprehension. I had to reread books 3 or 4 times over to understand them. So I began to realize that Orton Gillingham wasn't giving me all the cognitive capacities to succeed in life. In fact, I eventually made it miraculously to university and failed twice at university because I couldn't keep up with lectures. I couldn't follow through, and the reading was way too much for me. I remember using 4 different colored felts to highlight textbooks and use strategies to try to remember what I was reading, and then I used strategies for multiple choice exams. So I sort of understood right through university and into my work career that there's certain methods that work well for certain types of learning disabilities, but there was nothing that would address problems with memory and processing speed and written output and reasoning. And I was living it and I understood it. I then went on to start a teaching career. I graduated from Boston University and started teaching in Cape Cod in a small school district in Truro, and taught grade 3 and 4 as a learning resource support, and brought phonics and Orton Gillingham into this elementary school and started teaching kids to read. And then when my wife and I had our first child and we moved back to Vancouver, British Columbia, and I started doing assessments and testing of children and adults with learning disabilities, that's where I got to meet Sandra, who was involved in our testing practice. It was at that time that I was very much steeped into the awareness of strategies and accommodations and ways to bypass the cognitive weaknesses that come with learning disabilities. And I was a real advocate in teaching kids to be self-advocates and speak up for themselves and attend their individual education plan meetings. In fact, wrote curriculum and teaching tools that school teachers and advocates can teach children and adults to learn how to speak up for themselves and let people know they have these learning weaknesses. And I was also involved in the Learning Disability Association of Canada and coming up with definitions of learning disabilities and being adamant that we put that it was a lifelong problem, that the root cause were neurological weaknesses that could not be proved upon. So that was my framework, that this was lifelong, that nothing you could do could improve cognitive capacities. You had to live with it. And then along came a parent, Kathy Molnar was one of them, into my office where I did assessments and asked me, have you heard of Barbara Arrowsmith Young? And this was roughly 20 years ago, so 2 decades. I said, no, I've never heard of her. And she said, well, she advocates that children and adults with learning disabilities can actually improve brain function. And I think I kept myself from being too shocked and too surprised by what this parent was saying to me. Because remember, my paradigm was this was forever. And when someone in your field challenges your thinking, it's very disruptive. It can cause you some irritation and anguish. But I listened, and then the parent said, I'm going to move to Toronto from Vancouver. I'm going to fly. I'm going to move my family across Canada and go to this school. And I said, well, obviously you're going to make your own choice as a parent, and I wish you the best of luck, and let me know what happens. Come back afterwards and we can do an updated assessment. And then another parent and another parent and another parent who had started hearing about this school in Toronto came to me and said they're moving to Toronto. Several years later, they came back and I updated their assessments, did their psych ed assessments, and started looking at reading, writing, math. And I wasn't paying attention really to like processing speed and working memory and reasoning, because I had no idea, no conception that these could change. But when the assessment was presented to me, and I started looking at the data, and I started seeing cognitive shifts in capacity, like memory and reasoning and visual motor integration, my mind shut. I referred to, oh, we made a mistake at the beginning. We miscalculated, and it was better than it should have been when we first saw them. We actually sort of underestimated their ability. But when the second and third and fourth parent and their children all changes in cognitive capacity, that's when I phoned Barbara Aerosmith Young and said, you know, what are you doing? I need to see this. Can I fly to Toronto and see you at your school? Because I recognize that if you could change the brain's capacity to absorb information, to store it, and then to express it, you fundamentally shift that child's capacity to understand the world around them. And I understood that because of my own personal history of challenges with learning disabilities and working with the hundreds of families, both in public schools and private schools, as a teacher and as a clinician. And so I had to see what she was doing. When I finished that trip up, I was on a flight back to Toronto, sketching out how I would start Eaton Aerosmith School. And the journey began 16 years ago. And my first teacher recruit was Sandra Husel, and said, hey, listen, can you come teach with me? So the journey began. It wasn't an easy journey. There was a lot of people in the field in Vancouver who were upset with me for starting the school because it was going against common paradigm that children with learning disabilities had lifelong challenges, and it was a myth that the brain could change itself. Of course, we know better now, but 16 years ago, it was a challenge to get people to understand that. So here we are 16 years later, and now we're moving to online. It reduces the cost. It gives more opportunity to families around the world to access this. I'm excited to be part of that new paradigm shift.
Thanks, Howard. We're going to come back to you in a second. We're going to give Sandra a chance to introduce herself and pick up perhaps where you just introduced her 16 years ago. And Sandra, my question to you is why families would turn to a program like this rather than the more traditional academic intervention?
Absolutely. So yes, I'm Sandra Husel, and I've been very proud to be a part of this community, the Eaton Aerosmith community, for 16 years now, both as a staff member, as Howard said, the first teacher. I've also been the admissions director for a number of years, and over the past few years, I've also added the important badge of Eaton Aerosmith parent to my roster. So I'm the proud mom of a student who's about 2/3 of his way through his Aerosmith program, and so it's really exciting to be able to talk not only as a staff member who's watched, you know, over 1,600 students move through our schools, but also as a mom. So that's my background with our group, and it's a really good question, Jason, and it's one that we often get. And really, I think the answer is twofold. You know, why would someone choose a cognitive program as opposed to an academic program? The number one answer for most families is that they've tried that. They've done that. They've gone to programs where they're hoping that by working around the challenge or by strategizing or creating compensations or ways to make something easier or by providing a computer as opposed to having to write something, that in the end would kind of solve those problems. But, you know, after trying a number of different avenues, people start to get curious about, is there not something else that you can do to actually get to the root of this and grow the cognitive capacity or the brain's capacity to independently learn, so that you don't have to rely on that magic teacher or the tutor or mom and dad. And especially as you get older, that's not what you're really wanting to do anyway. You're wanting to be an independent learner with many paths ahead of you, as opposed to the path that is dictated to you by your particular learning style. So that's one answer. And then the other one is for people that really perhaps have struggled themselves in life to some degree and see the same patterns happening in their children and don't want that and know what doesn't work. And so right from the beginning, start looking through at education through a cognitive lens and work with us to be able to help their child or someone that they know really strengthen those cognitive capacities.
Thanks, Sandra. We're going to get an opportunity to see a little bit of the Aerosmith program in a minute. But first, Howard, you mentioned research, and I know that lots of people are interested in what has been done and what we're doing and what's to come. Can you tell us a little bit about the research, please?
I'm very excited about the research, and one of the things I was very impressed with Barbara Aerosmith Young is her love for research and her desire to have independent researchers look at her program without any oversight by the Aerosmith program, fully independent, and conduct studies at various universities with various methodologies, with the eventual goal to have them published in peer-reviewed journals to be presented at very serious conferences around the world that address issues like neuroscience and education. So one of my early conversations with Barbara is, could I help to get more research conducted? It wasn't that Barbara wasn't conducting research 40 years ago. In fact, she was conducting research on herself, which is how many ideas begin, where a brilliant mind says, I'm going to try this on myself and see if it works. Some of our most important interventions in science began with the idea person experimenting on themselves, and Barbara was an exactly example of that. And then she brought in researchers from local clinics in Toronto, Mount Sinai Research Hospital in Toronto. She had a researcher come in and begin to study the Aerosmith program. But my effort was to bring some more researchers involved, some universities involved, and to actually start using brain imaging and say, hey, what's going on in the human brain as someone is engaging in the Aerosmith program? So I was very excited about that. I was also excited about, could this help people other than those with just learning disabilities? How about someone with a brain injury or someone who's had a concussion that presents as a learning disability, or stroke? All sorts of applications that her work could be involved with. So I began in the field of learning disabilities, getting research going at the University of British Columbia with Dr. Lara Boyd and Dr. Rachel Weber, and then assisted in getting Southern Illinois University and Dr. Greg Rose involved in research as well. And they began the exploration of what's going on in the human brain. So to date, it's been 20 independent studies. I think over 700 students have been researched at 6 universities, I think 4 countries. I think 11 studies have been peer-reviewed, 2 have been published. 5 of these studies have had control groups. And probably the one area that really excites me is what's going on in the human brain. And one of the, both the University of BC and Southern Illinois University, they began to study an intensive 6-week exposure to the symbol relations program. The kids call it the CLOCKS program, or the analog clock program. And you're going to see, I think Jason's going to show an example of the CLOCKS program. And this exercise just absolutely fascinated me. I remember visiting Barbara in Toronto and watching kids do 3-handed clocks and 4-handed clocks. And I said, Barbara, why are they learning on an analog clock? We have digital now, that kids can just tell time on a digital clock. That's what I've been telling thousands of parents that I saw. You don't need to worry about telling time anymore. We got digital. And she said, oh, no. Learning to tell time on an analog clock is extremely important in terms of neurological function. If you have a child here today, or your child has trouble telling time on a clock, it's your first sign that they may have trouble with concepts or reasoning. For example, they could struggle with reading comprehension and math problem solving and understanding cause and effect in science. So knowing that clocks is so integral, why is it? What does the clocks program do? And I was asking Barbara, and she said, well, the clocks, telling time requires a whole variety of brain functions. Different sensory cortexes have to make sense of, has to integrate this information in one area of the brain called an association cortex. So what you see, what you touch, what you feel, when you analyze this information, it has to all come together in one area of the brain called the parietal temporal occipital association cortex. And if you actually image what happens when you are trying to read and understand or do math problems, this area of the brain fires up. So when you do the clocks exercise, you're actually engaging these cortical networks and these areas of the brain to exercise themselves and expand capacity and build structure and function. And it just blew my mind when I was hearing this, because no one in my field of education, when I was doing my bachelor's or master's degree or PhD, we didn't get much on the human brain as a teacher in training. No one ever spent time with us telling us about the brain. So I was absorbing all this knowledge from Barbara, and I said, I'd love one day to study that, just that one exercise. And fortunately, we were able to connect with Dr. Lara Boyd at UBC and her brilliant graduate students, and they created the ability to have children in a functional MRI look at a clock and give a yes/no answer to it. And we could see what's going on in their brain, both before they did the program and after. And what we saw was exactly what Barbara predicted, that these association area of the brain was firing up as they began to work on these clocks exercises. And over time, this brain became more efficient. The connectivity between these brain regions was better, and there was more activity in the parietal temporal occipital association cortex in just 6 weeks of intensive intervention. And those papers were presented at conferences around the world. So Jason, to see that was remarkable. But then we also saw the same thing in brain injury. It's the same effect neurologically, because all our brains are similar in structure and function. So it has this wide-ranging effect in many types of disabilities that affect human beings today. So yes, so research, I'm excited about it, and I know Barbara continues her effort to expand research because we're going to learn a lot. The field of learning disabilities is going to benefit from this research. Professors are going to start teaching students about the brain based on this research. It's just exciting to see what's happening today.
Jason, I think you're muted.
I was doing so well with the multitasking, and then I muted myself. What I was saying is that as I multitask, I was just going to share that my eldest son was involved in Dr. Boyd's research at UBC, and that was really fun to see him have his brain scanned. And I won't say whether he was a control or not. But anyway, hopefully you can all see my screen. You can see a clock on your screen. Give me a thumbs up, somebody, if you can see that. Thank you, Sandra, and others, Howard. So I've had the good fortune also of being with this program for the last almost 16 years as a teacher and as a principal and as a father and in admissions. And I just actually got to teach one of our cognitive intensive programs. So it was an 8-week program online, 3.5 hours per day, 5 days per week. And it's remarkable to see the changes that come through, the effort that's put forth as people of all ages change their brains for the better. So this is just a little example of what a student might see. We have our own portal into the Aerosmith program. So that's what you're seeing here. Each student has their own student number. And we're just going to show you a little bit about what three-handed clocks look like. So the students would see this, and of course this would not be their first level, but they would get them themselves here with our support, of course. And what this is about its engagement and effortful processing. So we teach concepts first, in case they don't know what the hour hand is and its function. Of course, there are 12 hours in a day, actually 24, so it goes through twice. But at this level, we don't need to know about 24-hour time yet. That comes at a higher level. You have to earn that badge. And then, of course, the concept of what the hour hand does and how to read it, because it's really close to the 8 number, but it's not 8 o'clock yet if we know how to read an analog clock. So then we help the students understand how to enter in the information. And so I said it was 8 o'clock, but actually it's 7 o'clock. And then we look at the minute hand. And of course, there's a relationship between the hour hand and the minute hand. And we need to know how to do all sorts of counting, up to 60 by ones and by fives, and sometimes by tens help. So there's lots of prerequisite work that a student can do before they join. If they don't know how to do that, we can work with them and families to make sure that they can do that. And then we teach the concept. So again, the relationship between the hour hand and the minute hand, and how the minute hands works in relationship with the hour hand. So then the student can see that this is the 54th minute. And of course you have to advance it properly like this. It's almost the 55th minute, but not quite. And then we get to move on to the second hand. So this is a three-handed clock. We have the hour hand, the minute hand, and then the second hand. And the second hand is exact. So it's just pointing at the 42nd second. And then I get instant feedback. We can see that I got the starburst with the green check mark. That means I got it right on the first time. And then I can go ahead and I can keep doing my clock. So we got 11 o'clock. And
Jason, as you do this, you know, what's happening in Jason's brain and our brain is we have these networks in our brain that speak from one cortical area to another. So the front of the brain speaks to the parietal area of the brain, to the occipital area of the brain. We have these networks that are connecting information as we pay attention, as we process what we're seeing, as we're making sense of space and time. And as we do this over and over again, these networks are going back and forth and connecting back and forth. And what we'll find with children with and adults with learning disabilities, they often have poor connectivity in these large-scale brain networks. So the work that's being done here is actually exercising, engaging these large-scale networks so that by the time you're finished, say, an 8-week intensive program, that connectivity is much stronger. And by having that connectivity in the human brain, you're able to make sense of your sensory environment with more clarity at a faster pace in real time. And if you talk to people with learning disabilities, they often feel they're in lag time. They're always behind in understanding. And this is how this program, just one of Barbara's 19 programs, is brilliantly transforming our neural structure and function so the world makes sense to us.
And it feels like my brain is working hard, right? When I can remove the distractions and I can actually focus on this, and rather than on what I'm trying to do or what Howard's saying, then I can. And so we look at a distracted behavior. We're strengthening those neurons and myelinating them, as Howard was just saying. In terms of the mechanics of the program, you can see, you know, when I make a couple of mistakes, especially if I do it on purpose, like I have been, then you can see how it gives you a second chance. So if you don't get it right the first time, so on this one, let's say that I'm going to get it wrong. I get a second chance, and it doesn't tell me the answer, so I can review it. If I need help, my teacher's never far away. And I'm going to get some feedback at the end of a set of 25 clocks to say how many I got right, how long it took for me to get there in this on this level, so that I get instant feedback. And then on the online, teachers have a tablet that are also dialed into the students program on the Aerosmith portal. And so we as teachers get instant feedback as well. And so we can have conversations with students about goal setting and about what they should be striving for so that they can get, maximum cortical growth through that. You can see if I make a mistake a second time, I do get the lovely X, but I also really, what's more helpful is that I get to see what my problem was. So it's still 4 o'clock, it's not 5 o'clock yet. And this is a big mistake. And Howard talked about this earlier with cause and effect thinking. This is exactly what we're talking about, is just having that relationship, between numbers in this case, but also in terms of relationships and concepts, and working towards mastery. And so when you master a concept, it's too easy, and we can do that then with great ease. And in order to do that, we need to be automatic, we need to be consistent, and we need to be accurate. And once that's happened, neurologically, what we've seen is that those connections have happened, and then there's lots of myelin, which helps to transmit information quickly. And then we get to make the task harder. So we actually get to go to a harder level, which is always really exciting when something becomes too easy, especially for someone who has had a difficulty in doing something to find success. Even if it's small, it's like this feeling of relief, like, oh my goodness, I got it right, I can do this. And then that goes with the growth mindset that we adhere to, Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindset that we've adopted as well. So I'm probably going to leave it there just for time, but if you want to know more, you can connect with Sandra or I, and we'd love to have that conversation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and as I do that, Howard wants to say something, and I have a question for Sandra.
I have to tell everyone who's listening, when I was doing my psych ed assessments, remember this, Sandra, my recommendation, as I said, would be to avoid the analog clock and just use the digital clock. I wish I could phone those thousands of parents and apologize. I didn't know what damage I was doing by not recommending they learn to tell time on a clock. It is transformational. So if you have a chance to do this, if learning analog clocks was difficult for you and you struggle with learning challenges, especially comprehension and reasoning, you got to do it. It's transformation.
Yep. Thanks, Howard. When I was teaching in a more non-Aerosmith typical classroom, I often tried not, and we used to teach analog clocks, and then of course it got cut from curriculum because it wasn't seen as important, but of course it really is.
I know there's articles out of Britain where they're taking analog clocks down from classroom walls because none of the kids know how to tell time.
Sandra, can you tell us, after we've seen some of the clocks and heard some of the research, heard why these schools exist, how do we know that a student is a good fit for the Aerosmith program and our schools?
I think the question is more who isn't a good fit for an Aerosmith program, really. I'm sure as you're all listening to this, it's piqued your curiosity as to what kind of exercises that you might benefit from. We all have uneven patterns in our learning style. We all gravitate towards things that we find easier. Those are our really well-developed neural networks, but we all have some unevenness there. It really just depends if our strengths and weaknesses have butt heads with what the education system is asking of us, what our job expectations are asking of us, etc. So this is a great program for people to boost their capacities. I know for myself, I chose to work on the clocks exercise for 2 years. I made it up to the 6-handed clock level. There's actually a 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and a 10-handed level. So when you get to be an adult, if you ever have a chance to work on it, as Jason said, to get up to that 6 or 8-handed level even, it really changes your perspective in terms of decision-making, organization, planning, prioritizing, reasoning, speed of understanding. So it is great for people who want that boost, no matter what their age, even if there's a student in school who is doing very well, but that doing very well is coming at the cost of their time, family effort and energy, seeing a tutor 5 nights a week, etc., then this kind of a program would be a fantastic fit. as it would be for students who are visibly struggling in school academically or socially. So there's really not anyone who wouldn't benefit, but you do have to have a place and have a mindset that you want to do this. And there's different stages in our lives where that willingness may come more easily. For others, especially sort of that teenage realm, sometimes we need a teacher or a family member to explain to us exactly what the benefit would be. But this is a very powerful way of really targeting and strengthening your capacity for learning with changes that truly last a lifetime. We follow people out of this program many, many years out. They come back and talk to us about how once Aerosmith has finished for a particular student, life becomes their new Aerosmith program exercise, because they're constantly being challenged to use these newly developed areas of their brain. So truly the answer is almost everyone is a really good fit. You do have to be willing and dedicated to do the work though, to be honest.
Yeah. Thanks, Sandra. I just remind anyone, if you do have a specific question that has not been answered yet, just pop it in the chat box. If you like, I fear if we do a hands up, it might just be difficult. So just pop it into the chat box. Chris is there directing traffic.
And if you can, Jason, one thing, if you can put it in the general chat, then Chris or Jason will see it as opposed to a private chat to either Howard or I. Thank you.
Good reminder, although we will get it anyway.
Could you say that again? I missed that.
Oh, if you're wanting to give us a question in the chat, just send it to everyone and then Jason and Chris can pick up on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sandra, you were talking a little bit about the classroom and the day at Aerosmith. Can you just tell us a little bit about what that typical day might look like, either in person or online?
Sure. I'm going to focus mostly on our new online offerings, just because since we're all connecting online right now, it's probably top of your mind. We have certainly had schools, we still continue to have schools that are opening September 8th in Vancouver, in a suburb of Vancouver called White Rock, and in Redmond, Washington in the United States. We have full-time and after-school programs there. But in terms of our online programs, we're so pleased finally after 16 years to be able to say that we can welcome the world to our Aerosmith classrooms. And we have 3 specific programs that we're offering right now. One starts on September the 8th, and it's called our at-home half-day program. And that allows students really from the ages of 6 all the way up to our oldest student has been 82. So there's never really a wrong age, or you can never use that excuse that, oh, I'm too old for Aerosmith, or my brain won't change anymore. It's not true. So you're most welcome to inquire about that. Students would work on 4 cognitive exercises, and through an Aerosmith program assessment, we would decide exactly which exercises would be most suitable for you. No 2 people, no 2 brains are the same, so we're not going to waste anyone's time by giving everyone the same program, because they're not going to benefit optimally in that way. We've got another program that requires a little less of a commitment. It's called a 4-hour-a-week program, and it runs Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for an hour. There's multiple class sections that you can choose from to match a time that suits you. And during that, you'd work on 1 cognitive exercise. Generally, we like to start with the symbol relations or the clocks exercise that Jason demonstrated, just because, as Howard was mentioning, it really does target brain efficiencies such as reasoning, processing speed, executive functioning, working memory, which you need to use every second of your day, regardless of whether you're a young child, a teenager, an adult, someone at school, someone at work. So we always want to start with that exercise, and it is actually a really fun, powerful exercise to do. If someone was to finish that exercise, then we would look at doing a full programming assessment to see what could come next. And then our final offering is, as Howard and Jason were speaking about, is what we call our cognitive intensive program. And that online is an 8-week program where students are actually exposed to a year's worth of the symbol relations exercise in that 8 weeks. And research has been done, functional MRIs have been done comparing the efficacy of working on this program an hour a day, 4 days a week for a year, and 8 weeks, about 3 to 4 hours a day, to see which is more effective. And the answer is they're both equally as effective. So the model choice really comes down to the personality of the student, the time you have available, and what your desire is. So those are our 3 programs: at home half day, an hour a day, 4 days a week, and 8 weeks, about 3 to 4 hours a day.
Thanks, Sandra. We're just going to pull away from the script for just a second. We do have a number of questions coming in, and I'm just going to fire them to you and Howard in the order that they came in. So the first one, Howard, is that for a student designated as having attention deficit disorder, is Eaton Aerosmith School a potential resource?
I think absolutely. One of the things that Barbara Aerosmith Young taught me is a few decades ago, was just how important cognitive capacity was to having good attention control. For example, if you have difficulty with remembering what you're listening to, or you have trouble making sense of what you're reading because of reasoning problems, or you have trouble with visual motor output, so it takes you forever to get notes down or to get ideas on paper, you could very much look like you have an attention disorder, because the effort put in to try to gauge this sensory world is so exhausting that you lose focus. And so I think probably 70 to 75% of children diagnosed with ADHD don't have what we'd say neurotransmitter problem where the brain just can't focus, but the primary issue is weak cognitive capacities leading to inattentiveness and an inability to focus. And so we often get kids who come in on our on-site schools who have medication for ADHD. And they ask us, should they stay on the meds? And we often say yes. But as they move through these cognitive capacity exercises at, say, the 3 or 6 months level, we'd ask them to reduce the dosage. And usually, roughly 70 to 75% can come off meds after 1 year of the Aerosmith program and not showing the attention disorder. And it all makes sense when you look at the diagnosis of LD. There's roughly a 30% comorbidity that you'll also have ADHD. So if you diagnose with LD, there's a 30% chance you also have ADHD. And the primary cause of both are weak cognitive capacities. And they're not understanding this in education. In fact, one of the research findings that was really remarkable to see out of the University of British Columbia was when they put the children in a functional MRI and asked them just to relax and not think about anything in particular. It's called putting them in a resting state, imaging scan. And a healthy brain, a healthy child, will have activity in the medial frontal lobe, even at rest. It sort of lights up right there. And this is the area of sort of attention, control, and direct thought. You need to have sort of an attention capacity to direct sort of brain actions. What they found with the children who started Aerosmith was many of them had a lower activation in the medial prefrontal lobe, with the theory that they're just not using it a lot, and therefore they're disengaged. And you start thinking about, what are we doing in special ed with our kids in public schools, in resource rooms, and giving them all the information they need, reteaching them, reminding them, even parents. If you're a parent here, you're always having to plan and organize for your child. By not having the child learn how to engage these capacities, they end up not having the neurological complexity in that area of the brain to do it. And so without scaffolds and guidance and resource room, they fall apart. And you see that with the kids with LD who transition to college. Many of them really struggle because all of a sudden they have all this freedom and they have to have these neurological capacities to cope, and they don't have them. And that's so I think we're in a paradigm that's actually creating cognitive weaknesses, rather than enhancing them. And obviously we're all in it for the right reason. But I think in special education for learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder, we're not approaching it properly, meaning deal with the cognitive weakness first, and then everything else can come together.
Thanks, Howard. I'm going to get you to keep talking here. The next question is about nonverbal learning disability or those on the autism spectrum, if you could speak to that.
One of the saddest things for me when I was working with Sandra, not working with Sandra per se, but one of the saddest things was to get someone, a child who had a NLBD or nonverbal learning disability, where all their perceptual organization scores on the IQ test were low. So making sense of visual information and understanding what they're seeing was really problematic. And of course, nonverbal learning disabilities, they often blend into Asperger's or a form of autism, where social interaction is problematic for both of them. I often would say to Sandra that, boy, there's really nothing we can do for this kid who has nonverbal learning disabilities, because they have to live the rest of their lives with this cognitive dysfunction. And so when I saw Aerosmith and that she actually directly addresses nonverbal cognitive capacities, I was stunned. Like no one I had seen had an intervention other than, you know, kids going to group counseling and working together and trying to build friendships that way. There was nothing that addressed the underlying cognitive weaknesses that resulted in nonverbal learning disabilities. And Barbara, over time, has created these cognitive exercises that address these areas of brain. I know with Asperger's that you can go through Aerosmith and have better social perception, and you're making sense of the world, and you have more confidence, but you still you still look sort of at times awkward. You still, you know, have the sort of Asperger type personality. But when you talk to someone who has been through the Aerosmith program that have like nonverbal issues, they know they're able to make sense of the world better. I don't know, Sandra, if you wanted to add to that.
No, I agree with everything you've said. The one consideration, you know, if you're considering your child or someone you know, the Aerosmith program by design does have to be repetitious. That's the way our brain changes, is by, you know, giving it good reason to grow and to strengthen, because the owner of that brain is asking you to use that part much more. And so anyone who's working on the exercises has to be able to, and yes, we've talked about attention control, and certainly it is strengthened by the Aerosmith program, but to have that initial ability to engage in the exercise and also to take feedback and apply it, given from the teacher or the instructor, because we're working with intelligent people, that nobody is discrediting that. But as intelligent people, what we tend to do is work around something that is a challenge, or say, okay, well, I've listened to you, but I'd rather do it this way because it's easier. But working around a challenge or finding that easier path does not actually allow you to target and strengthen a weaker capacity. So you do have to be able to listen to the feedback as to how the exercise should be, you know, implemented and do so. And so if a student is not yet at that level of being able to understand and apply knowledge, then at this point in time, we wouldn't be the best fit. But certainly we've helped lots of families to find programs that would be sort of predecessors to Aerosmith, and then we reconnect a few years down the road and have really great success with that person.
Great, thanks, Sandra. I'm going to keep you talking too, because I got to put two questions into one from the audience here. One is about the key differences between the in-school and the online programs.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're thinking about that, for a teenager who's easily distracted, what is done by the online program staff and what's recommended at home to help that student stay on task and motivated? I thought they were kind of connected, if you could answer that.
No, that's fine. So the big difference between, you know, online and in-school programs, obviously when you're in school, you're going to get more of a social connection with other people. You're going to have a greater chance of making, you know, peer relationships because you're right there together. That being said, in this day and age with COVID, you know, things do look a little bit different. Although our schools are open, certainly we're respecting social distancing, and, you know, everything that, you know, needs to happen for a school to stay healthy. But socialization is the big one. Also within our in-school programs, especially if it's a full day program, which tends to run from about 8:30 to 3 o'clock, students do work on 6 cognitive exercises throughout the course of the day, again, individualized to them. And then they're also working on an individualized program of language arts, so, you know, reading, writing, spelling, and also math. So that, and those 2 subjects are really chosen because they tend to be the building block subjects that you need, you know, for further success in life. And they're also the ones that we tend to have big gaps in, you know, as students moving through the school system or even adults, because if you're sitting in a class, you know, even if you're in 2nd grade or 3rd grade and someone's teaching about multiplication and your working memory is weak, it's very hard to hold on to that. Or if your conceptual ability is weak, how do you comprehend and hold on to what you've read so you can easily move through the grades and not have those abilities, you know, at hand, like someone who may not struggle in that way does. And so as students in our in-school programs are working through their cognitive exercises and the teachers are seeing the real shifts in reasoning and speed of understanding and ability to express oneself, et cetera, then they can really start to fine-tune an academic program to fill in those gaps and ready a student for success as they transition out of Aerosmith. If a student is online, like I said, our maximum in a half-day program is 4 cognitive exercises, but you can add on an additional 2 through that 4-hour-a-week program. And certainly we can chat in more detail personally about that, because there's lots of combinations that we can work up to enable someone to be successful. And someone working online can also access online academic providers. We've got a great list of wonderful people who work with us, so we can form a whole program that way. So there are differences, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And the second question, I've got that in my working memory, is how do you keep someone motivated online? When we started and we had to shift everyone, all of our students online in April due to COVID, it was very important to us that the program that we delivered was as close to our in-person offerings as possible, meaning we knew it would not work if we were meeting students online on Monday, giving them some work to do and checking in on them on Friday. That just does not work well with our students, or frankly with most of us out there. There's just too many variables that get in the way of success there. So if a student is meeting us online, they are joining through the Microsoft Teams platform a virtual classroom where you say you're logging in at 9 o'clock in the morning for your half-day class. You're there, your teacher is waiting for you. A maximum of about 9 other students are there as well. The first 10 minutes or so are all about connection, sharing of successes, discussion of goals for that particular day. And then after that, each student moves into their own sort of mini classroom where they are working on their own in that classroom, not able to see what the others are doing, because sometimes that's distracting. I mean, as a culture, we're very open about what everyone's working on. There's no secrets, there's no shame to having, you know, areas of weakness that we're working on. We celebrate change. We celebrate making mistakes even, because that's actually how the brain grows and changes. But when you're working, we want to afford each student the opportunity to have as much focus time as possible. So each student is working on their own individualized classroom. And the teacher's job then is to move from classroom to classroom, checking in on those students. And the real beauty and why this works so well is a few years ago, Aerosmith program developed a cloud-based data collection system called BrainX. And in that way, any piece of data or progress that a student makes by typing in, you know, an answer on the computer or interacting with the teacher is all recorded in real time. So we have a list of our students' names, their brain exercises, their goals, the percentage of accuracy, how quickly they're going, and even their engagement. So we know if someone is, you know, at that computer, or this seems to have taken them an awfully long time. Are they even there? Let's send a quick email to mom and dad to see. I mean, I had it happen with my own son where he was working online downstairs, and I'm actually set up in his son's bedroom, you know, in my office here. And I got a little text saying, it seems like Sam has opened another browser. Can you check on him? And so, you know, I'd go down and say, what are you doing? Oh, nothing, back to work. So there's instant feedback as to how someone is doing, and that affords the real chance to be motivating and to check in without everybody around to say, hey, it looks like, you know, you're doing awesome today, let's build on that, or it looks like you're having a bit of a tough time. What kind of plan can we create between you and I, and then between our families as well, if that, you know, works best? We've had families, and Jason, you can probably speak to it, I'm thinking of one of your families who created amazing incentives. You know, I did it with my son. Sometimes you do have to do that in order to keep someone extrinsically motivated for a while until the intrinsic kicks in. But, you know, I cannot say enough about our teachers. We never would have hired them unless they give 1,000% to our students and their families. They are very experienced in terms of special education, working with students who have had, you know, struggles along the way and perhaps are a little bit reticent to really show their true selves, and they really pull them out. And you see that confidence start to blossom because, hey, they are able to do things that they never thought possible before.
Yeah,
Thanks, Sandra.
Jason, just add briefly, one of the brilliance of Barbara Aerosmith-Young and her team in designing the programs was that she really made sure that wherever you start a child or adult, it's in their zone of proximal development, meaning they can do it without a lot of oversight or guidance, that they are able to challenge themselves on the task, even though it's challenging, and then build capacity, increase their zone of capability and master it, and then switch to another level, which matches their current zone of proximal development, which itself is self-motivating.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, they're able to do it on their own without someone saying, this is how you do it, and reminding them every day, this is how you do it. So it builds on that. And another way I've seen that is in the field of brain injury. When we first started in brain injury, the experts said that people with brain injury will never be able to do Aerosmith because they don't have the attention capacity to do it. But they underestimated Barbara Aerosmith-Young's genius at creating an exercise that can engage almost anyone and keep them focused on the task. I think that's part of the remarkable capabilities of this program and why it's successful online.
And as a result of that design, you know, a lot of times we get a question in admissions by parents saying, you know, I have to work at home. I'm doing other things. I can't sit there with my child. I've had to do that when they're working on academic work given by their school. I don't know about this online learning. And what we'll say to them is, due to the design, due to the fact that you have a teacher right there with you every second of the time you're online, your job as a parent is really just to make sure that that child or that person makes it to the seat. You know, feed them well, make sure they're hydrated, get them some exercise and good sleep, and we're going to take it from there. We'll certainly, you know, loop you in terms of progress, celebration, working through any kind of challenges, but we've got it really when they're with us.
Great. And we're just about out of time. I want to respect everyone's time. We're just approaching 6 o'clock. I want to make sure that we've answered all of the questions. And if for some reason I neglected to answer your question, you can contact Sandra and I'm just going to put it in the chat box here, by email or by phone, or link on the website, or through social media, and just reach out and we can have those conversations with you again. We're happy to do that. With our final minute and a half, Howard, do you have any final thoughts? And just as you're thinking about what those are, I want to thank everyone for participating. Sandra will send you an email thanking you and possibly enticing you with a PDF to Howard's book, Brain School. That is, I think it's a great read and really informative as well. Barbara's book, of course, The Woman Who Changed Her Brain, is another remarkable story as well. So I leave that with you. And I'm just reading here as If I may, a 67-year-old new EAS student just finished the first online part-time course today and says it's been amazingly good for their brain. So,
Woohoo! I know who that is. That's so wonderful.
absolutely. Yeah. And we'll respond to all the other messages as we connect after the webinar through email or phone or through social media. So Howard, I'll leave it with you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for attending and giving me and my team an hour of your time and your attention. I know when I first heard about the Aerosmith program, I was stunned, and it took me a while to process all that I was being told. Now 16 years of doing the Aerosmith program, I can't tell you how fortunate I feel that parents came to me and said, you got to meet Barbara Aerosmith Young, because there's nothing as rewarding as changing the capacity of a person to learn by changing their brain and knowing what that means. And we often don't get feedback from families until the child's transitioned to a new school or to college, and 6 months after graduating, the parent reaches out and says, wow, the program really worked. So often during the program, they weren't too sure, but when the child transitioned or the adult to the new environment or the environment they previously failed at and they're no longer failing, often, that's when the parent goes, wow, this program's having an impact that I didn't see or understand. And so, and I know the staff here have felt the same way. That's why we have staff who've been here 16 years, 15 years, some who've been part of my assessment group for the last 20 years. It's not because I'm a nice person and they like working for me. It's because they love seeing the changes in these people they work with. There's nothing as transformational. And if you're in the field as a teacher in special ed, you last 3 years on average. That's the lifelong last of a special ed teacher is 3 years, because it's so painful to see the ongoing suffering. And my dream, I know Barbara Aerosmith Young's dream, is that this is available in public schools where parents don't have to pay huge tuition amounts to have access. And this is why I've been dedicated to research. Barbara and her team have been dedicated to research. So public schools may adopt this and more people can have access, more children who are suffering can have access to this. So if you're in a school district, share the research we have, let them know what we're doing, ask them to contact the Aerosmith program in Toronto. You're all part of a new pioneer group of families who are now learning about what's possible. So thanks for being with us this evening. I'm forever grateful.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Have a great evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.